All right, chapter 19, coming out of the discourse in chapter 18, number 4, discourse number 4, where we focused on interactions between believers and spiritual leadership, authority. How are the disciples, when Jesus leaves, to treat the church, which they don't really know about yet? But we see the very, very, very beginnings of the church. The church was built in chapter 16 on Peter's confession that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, to take away the sins of the world. And then it was built out in chapter 18, where we see really how spiritual leaders should operate. We see that they're not great, quote unquote, by worldly standards just because they're a spiritual leader. The greatest are those who are like children, humble, needy, dependent. Wow, what an upside down kingdom Jesus is painting for us. His kingdom is different. And if you're primarily influenced by the world, such as everyone is, then you will have to reframe your thinking around Jesus's kingdom. And he's going to continue doing that in chapter 19 and 20. In fact, that's his main theme throughout 19 and 20, is showing in all these different stories, parables, lessons, how kingdom ethics are upside down. This is known as the journey to Jerusalem. It's only 2 chapters. In Luke's gospel, it's from chapters 10 to 19. So it's a huge chunk in Luke. And that whole time, the emphasis is on teaching the disciples, the 12, and anyone else who's truly following him. So here we have a shorter journey to Jerusalem, quote unquote, ending in chapter 21, where he enters into Jerusalem and begins the final week of his life. So that's where we're at from a broad scope. He begins with teaching about divorce. Now, in this section, the main theme is that they have turned divorce, the Pharisees, because they're the leaders, so they're going to set the pace for when and how to divorce. They have turned it into a convenience for man. Marriage is simply a convenience. And Jesus is reframing it to show no, marriage is instituted by God, and it's meant to be a man and his wife together forever. And nothing should separate them, because what God puts together, you become one flesh. No man can ever separate. Now, in the case of adultery, infidelity, Jesus does allow for divorce. And if you think about it, you've put yourself with another. You've become one flesh with another person through the act of sexual immorality. But that's not the intention. The intention is always one man, one woman. Their culture, the Jewish culture, men were more important than the women. And so if a man didn't like being married anymore, he would divorce her because of any reason. Didn't like her voice, didn't like the way she cooked dinner, didn't like what she wore. She was getting overweight, didn't like it. Divorce. And Jesus is correcting them, saying this isn't the way it's supposed to be. So divorce is wrong. Divorce is sinful. Divorce will disqualify you from um, pastoral ministry. If you read the qualifications of being an elder in First Timothy and in Titus, you're a one-woman man. Now that means you obviously do not engage in polygamy, but it would also take you out of the qualification. Potentially, this is a nuanced topic, so I don't want to speak too strongly on it, but it would take you out of the qualification if you had a divorce, depending on the nature of the divorce. So So yeah, the kingdom, he's reinstating this. Now, I love this section, verse 10 following. It says, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry. If you got to be married forever, you shouldn't even get married. You see how their culture viewed marriage. I mean, it's different, I think, even than our culture. I think our culture is a little more favorable to lifelong marriage. We at least see it and say, wow, that's great. You see a Facebook post and someone's been married 40 years. Everyone says, wow, that's great. And obviously it is. It's incredible. Um, but he says to them, not everyone can receive this saying. So in other words, Jesus is like, yeah, there's something to what you just said. In this day and age, and Jesus is, kind of saying this, with all the sin, as difficult as it is to live for God's kingdom, you're right. It may be easier to not get married. You could focus then on kingdom stuff. Paul says the same thing in one of the first or second Corinthians. I can't think of it right now. But he says, not everyone can receive this. And so this makes me think of chapter 11, where Jesus says, my yoke is easy, but my burden is light. Or in First John, where it says, and his commandments are not burdensome. Jesus does not set the bar too high. Now, he sets it impossibly high for someone trying to do it on their own strength to enter the kingdom, but he doesn't make it to where only super Christians can follow. And I think that's just amazing. Now, if you're one who can receive the saying, don't get married. If you can practice celibacy and not struggle with what you would obviously struggle with, not ever being married, then maybe you can receive the saying and maybe you have a life of ministry ahead of you. But Jesus isn't going to make that a standard. And I just love that from a general perspective, how Jesus leads his flock and his people. And you can love Jesus with all your heart and love others. And he's not going to raise the bar so high. But at the same time, you'll find just dying to yourself is hard enough. So I'm grateful that Jesus's commandments are not burdensome. And he doesn't show us everything we need to change right off the bat either. So then this section on the children coming to Jesus, people brought children to him. The question is, how old are the children? Well, they were brought to him, so they're not little boys and girls running around. They're not 6 years old. They're probably infants to about 3 or 4 years old, because they're brought to him, and Jesus doesn't even teach them. Um, he just lays his hands on them and prays. Well, that's what they wanted him to do. Yeah, verse 15, he laid his hands on them and went away. He didn't teach them. He may have taught them, but it doesn't say he taught them. So I'm left thinking these children were very small. And this is where the age of accountability came from. Basically, anyone under 12 years old automatically gets to go to heaven. Well, you can't put a number on it because children develop at different ages. But basically, there is an age in which the child is innocent. Have they sinned? Yes. Did they do so intentionally? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how old they are. Obviously, infants are guilty of selfishness if you've ever had an infant. But are they intentionally doing it? They don't know any better. Could they have faith in Jesus? No, they're too young, so they go to heaven. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that a wonderful mercy of God, that he would make a way for all these wonderful children that we'll get to meet in heaven? Any child that's ever been aborted will be in heaven. You'll get to meet them and get to know them. It's just an incredible grace and mercy of God, and how he will turn every woe, every illness, every death, every sadness into joy in heaven. What a great Savior, what a great God who can give his mercy to anyone who he wants. I just love that. Lastly, we have a story of the rich young man. The rich young man says, what do I need to do to get to heaven? And we know there's a problem with that because you can't do anything to get to heaven. But before Jesus deals with that, he deals with the idea of goodness. And Jesus says, why do you ask me about what is good? There's only one who is good. Paul will reiterate this in Romans chapter 3. No one is good, no, not one. But while the man is thinking that, Jesus isn't able to correct it. So he says, okay, just do all the commandments, man. The dude's like, I did all the commandments. He's like, okay, well now, because he can see his heart, he sees that he has an unhealthy attachment to money. He says, sell everything you got. The man goes away sad. We all know the story, right? Is it a story that we all need to sell our wealth and be poor so we can have heaven? Well, no, obviously not. But this man needed to. But Jesus uses him as an example to the disciples. I think that's the greater story about what's going on here. And Jesus is a great teacher. He's dealing with multiple things at one time. But the last theme that we want to see in chapter 19 is that after we see about marriage and its value in the kingdom, we see about children and their value in the kingdom, and now we're looking at wealth, a major cultural theme. And there's a major misunderstanding around the topic of wealth that Jesus has to correct. What is the topic? Rich people get to go to heaven. Rich people are blessed, therefore God favors them, so they're definitely going to heaven. That's what they thought. If you're rich, you can give more money to the alms, to the poor. You can give more tithe and offering. So God's going to let you go to heaven because their whole religion was wrapped around merit and what you can do to earn eternal life. And Jesus is turning that upside down. Not true. He says, with great difficulty. That means it's very hard, it's rare, and it's frustrating to get to heaven when you're rich. Riches and wealth is a huge spiritual hindrance to the kingdom of heaven. Someone says, I see what it cost me to get to heaven. I'm not willing to pay the cost. So first he says it's very difficult. Then he says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. This is a hyperbole given to them to show that it's actually impossible to do. So it's difficult for a rich person because they have spiritual obstacles. But then he says, and then it's impossible to do with man in general. Salvation is impossible to earn on your own. They say, well, who can be saved? Well, anyone with God. With man, it's impossible, not just with rich men, with all men, but with God, all things are possible. So riches are a spiritual hindrance. And just because someone's rich, so this is where he's turning the culture upside down. Just because someone's rich, they don't get special entrance into heaven. In fact, it's actually going to be an impediment to them. But here's the silver lining. All things are possible with God. Without God, no one's getting saved. Put that together with how he says you must become like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven, be humbled. God's kingdom is upside down. And then lastly, I forgot about this section, but Peter says, look, we've left everything. Aren't we awesome? I mean, we're so grateful for Peter because we learn so much from him. But I could never ask these kind of questions to Jesus, not because I'm so humble, but because I'd be so afraid of the confrontation and the kickback from asking these questions. Peter would be a great journalist, although he's so selfish. So he says, we've left everything and followed you. What then followed you? What then will we have? And Jesus said, well, even your rewards are different. I'm not going to bless you now. You're blessed by getting spiritual authority, leadership, influence. You're going to lead a bunch of people to Christ when I leave, Peter. You get to spend time with me. That's great. You're going to watch me die, but you're also going to witness a resurrection, the ascension, many miracles. You're going to do Pentecost, but you're also going to die on a cross upside down in a few decades. And it's going to be rough. Like, you're going to have a rough life. But in heaven, in the new world, this is the millennial kingdom. When I sit on the glorious throne, you will have followed me. All the disciples will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And I always wonder where Paul will be, because Judas will not be on the throne because he betrays Jesus, not to give away the end of the story. And someone else is re- replaces Judas, but then Paul's also like the 13th apostle. So like Paul literally doesn't get a throne, but he's really influential. But hey, it'd be like that in the kingdom. So even in the kingdom, Jesus writes the rules for rewards. And I'm going long, so let me just wrap this up. But basically, chapter 19, the kingdom is upside down. Marriage is different than they thought. Children going to heaven is different than they thought. It ain't about rich people. Just because they're rich, they don't get to come into heaven. And the rewards are even different in the kingdom. You get rewarded later when you die. And they're going to be great rewards, but they're sovereignly given to you by God, by no merit of your own, good works that he prepared for you to walk in. Ephesians 2:10. So that's chapter 19. Meditate on the kingdom today. Where do you have misunderstandings about God's kingdom? Where are you maybe viewing the kingdom through the lens of culture and need to correct that? Ask God to reveal that so that you can be more aligned with his word.